A businessman collapsed at Louisville Airport, sobbing uncontrollably at Gate 12. He had just missed his flight to his father's funeral. For 15 years, they hadn't spoken after a bitter argument about money and family business. This was supposed to be his chance to make things right, to say goodbye properly. But now the plane was gone, and so was his last opportunity. Other passengers quickly looked away, grabbing their bags and moving to different seats. The uncomfortable silence was broken only by his desperate crying. Then an elderly janitor stopped mopping nearby. He quietly sat down next to the broken man. Without asking questions or offering complex advice, he simply said, "Sometimes the hardest journeys start with missing the first flight." Those 8 words hit like lightning. The businessman looked up, wiped his eyes, and suddenly saw a new path forward. He drove through the night instead, arriving just in time to reconcile.
The janitor's wisdom stayed with him. 3 months later, he found himself at that same airport, but this time, he wasn't running from anything. He was there to help others who felt lost and broken, just like he had been. He started a foundation called Second Flights, dedicated to helping people reconnect with estranged family members. The program offered counseling, travel assistance, and most importantly, hope. Within the first year, they reunited over 200 families. One woman wrote to him saying she hadn't spoken to her sister in 20 years over a wedding dispute. Through the foundation, they met at a coffee shop halfway between their cities. They cried, they laughed, and they remembered why they loved each other in the first place. Another man had abandoned his son 30 years ago. He thought it was too late, that the damage was irreversible. But the foundation showed him that it's never too late to try. His son was hesitant at first, but eventually agreed to meet. Today, they talk every week. The businessman realized something profound through all of this. Missing that flight wasn't his greatest failure. His greatest failure would have been giving up in that moment of despair. The janitor had given him more than words. He had given him permission to start over. He often thinks about that elderly janitor who changed his life with 8 simple words. He tried to find him months later to thank him properly, but the man had retired and moved away. Nobody at the airport knew where he went, but in a way that janitor is still there. His wisdom lives on in every family reunion, every tearful embrace, every second chance that the foundation makes possible. Sometimes the people who save us are strangers who appear exactly when we need them most. The foundation grew beyond anyone's expectations. They opened chapters in 15 cities. They trained volunteers who had their own stories of reconciliation. Each person who found healing became a beacon for someone else, still lost in the darkness. What started as one man's worst day became a movement of hope and healing. And it all began with missing a flight and meeting someone who understood that sometimes our biggest mistakes become our greatest opportunities. Years passed, and the businessman, now in his 60s, received an unexpected letter. It was from a young woman named Sarah who had attended one of the foundation's events. She wrote that she had been estranged from her mother for a decade, and the foundation had helped them reconcile just weeks before her mother passed away from cancer. Sarah's letter described their final conversations, the forgiveness they shared, and the peace her mother found in those last days. She thanked him for creating a space where healing was possible. Without the foundation, she would have lived with that regret forever. Reading that letter, the businessman wept again, but these were different tears. These were tears of gratitude and purpose. He realized that his father's death, as painful as it was, had given birth to something beautiful. His grief had been transformed into a gift for others. He began speaking at conferences and universities, sharing his story and the lessons he had learned. He talked about the power of second chances, the importance of swallowing pride, and the courage it takes to reach out after years of silence. One evening, after a speaking engagement, a young man approached him nervously. The young man explained that he had fought with his brother over an inheritance, and they hadn't spoken in 5 years. He asked for advice on how to begin the conversation. The businessman smiled and shared the janitor's wisdom. Sometimes the hardest journey starts with missing the first flight. Then he added his own insight. The first step is always the hardest, but it's also the most important. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Just reach out. 6 months later, that young man sent a photo. It showed him and his brother standing together, arms around each other's shoulders, both smiling. The caption read, "Thank you for giving me the courage to take that first step." These moments became the fuel that kept the businessman going. Every reunion, every healed relationship, Every family brought back together reminded him why he had started this journey. The foundation wasn't just helping others, it was continuing to heal him too. He established a scholarship program for young people who wanted to study conflict resolution and family therapy. He wanted to create a new generation of healers who understood that broken relationships could be mended with patience, compassion, and courage. The foundation also partnered with hospitals and hospice centers, helping people make peace with loved ones before it was too late. They trained staff to facilitate difficult conversations and create safe spaces for reconciliation. One hospice nurse told him that his program had changed everything about how they approached end-of-life care. Families were finding closure, patients were dying in peace, and the staff felt like they were part of something truly meaningful. As the businessman reflected on his journey, he understood that the janitor at the airport had been right in ways he couldn't have imagined. Missing that flight had been the beginning of a new journey, one that had touched thousands of lives and created ripples of healing that would continue long after he was gone. The story reminds us all that our darkest moments can become turning points, that strangers can change our lives with simple acts of kindness, and that it's never too late to reach out, to forgive, to heal, and to start again.